Number 10 in-season trade. Deion Branch to Seattle.
I have a few rules in life, and one of them is never trade anything with Bill Belichick. If Bill Belichick is selling you a bill of goods, that means that bill of goods is probably not going to help your team.
You do not want to call up Bill Belichick when he's trying to get rid of a player. Usually he knows why he's getting rid of a player.
The Deion Branch trade in season from the Patriots to the Seahawks after Deion Branch won the Super Bowl MVP in 2005, it seemed odd.
This was a disastrous trade for the Seahawks.
Branch was traded to Seattle for their first-round pick in 2007.
Deion Branch was a good receiver. He was not worth a first-round pick.
I mean, they gave up a great pick, and he had about one halfway decent year in 5 seasons there.
Matt's going to throw. Has time. Throws to the end zone. The catch is made. Touchdown, Seahawks.
We just getting started, baby. We just getting started.
Do you know why that was a huge in-season trade? Had nothing to do with what the Seahawks got, has everything to do with the Patriots did not get.
You look at that 2006 team, if they kept Deion Branch, if they found a way to keep him on that roster, I think there's a real good chance that 2006 team is able to finish that job. They're able to beat the Colts, they're able to go on to the Super Bowl and beat the Bears, and you get another Super Bowl for Tom Brady.
If Deion Branch were catching passes for the Patriots all year instead of, Rashae Caldwell and Doug Gabriel.
If Bill Belichick could get a mulligan for a trade over the course of his career, maybe that's the one.
Deion Branch was a Super Bowl MVP, and he was good. So in your mind, you weigh, was he a product of the Patriot system?
Initially, I thought he was just a product of the system. It turns out he was much, much more. And if you go back and you talk to Tom Brady, he'll talk about how in sync he was with Deion Branch.
Deion Branch has it at the 10, at the 5, and the end zone. Touchdown! This kid is a real fighter.
Brady, very early on, took to Deion, and they developed a really good chemistry in the early going.
I think if not for the injury, he would have had much better success in Seattle. He was a terrific player. Not quite great, but a terrific player.
He just got injured. He hurt his knee and was never the same player after that. So I think he probably gets unfairly maligned a little bit.
And then the Patriots ended up getting him back for free.
The number 9 in-season trade. Trent Richardson to the Colts.
When Trent Richardson was traded, everyone said the Browns were making a huge mistake.
Oh, baby, have we got somebody special?
How can they trade their centerpiece away after just a season and a game?
And to do it 2 games into the season, Brown fans have the right to kind of go, oh gosh, not again, here we go.
I thought the Colts got, they just stole something from these poor Cleveland Browns.
There were no doubts about Trent Richardson going into that draft. Everybody, to a man, said he is the next Adrian Peterson.
Mike Mayock saying it, Greg Cosell saying it.
I had him ranked as arguably the best player in the draft. Did I say that out loud?
No, for me, I feel like I got a lot to prove, in this league. And following the footsteps that I'm following, with the great Jim Brown with his shoes, is big.
The leader in touchdowns by a rookie Brown running back.
Jim Brown was a seer.
Good. Trying to get out there. We're trying to get out there.
He thought Trent Richardson was an average running back.
You put Trent Richardson next to Andrew Luck and roll out the championships, right? This should be easy.
One day I'm at practice for the Browns, and the next day I'm here. I've been on team for 3 days.
It just didn't work. They lose a first-round pick that they could have used, and for 2 years, Trent Richardson gave them very little.
That's all day, man. That's easy.
It's like those horror movies where the lights come on and Dracula just, falls apart. Like, he was no more. He turned to dust.
Trust your instincts. Let your instincts take over, okay?
He looked nothing like he did at Alabama. He looked slow. He looked stiff.
Shouldn't be doing all this. Don't be shaking at all.
I'm sure you're going to have a montage of him missing wide open rushing lanes as he runs right up his centering guard's pads for no gain.
I remember the playoff game that year. Trent Richardson got one touch and fumbled the ball. That kind of sums up Trent Richardson's career in Indianapolis. Nothing went right for that guy at all.
You're good. Come on. You always win. That's all.
I'm shocked that the Browns actually pulled this off and that they didn't trade for him.
It's great that they got a first-round pick for Trent Richardson, but if you look at what Cleveland did with the pick that they got.
Cleveland Browns select Johnny Manziel, quarterback, Texas A&M.
This is the ultimate lose-lose trade in NFL history.
Classic Browns, they don't actually do anything with it. They get the first-round pick, and then they waste it on Johnny Manziel.
The major lesson there is anytime a homeless person tells you to draft somebody, you should get a second opinion from another homeless person just to make sure.
The number 8 in-season trade, Carson Palmer to the Raiders.
Carson signed a contract. He made a commitment.
And throwing long left side. He's got T.O. Oh, there he's got it!
He gave his word. We relied on his word.
A painful, painful loss for the Cincinnati Bengals.
We relied on his commitment.
He quit. He quit on the Bengals.
Gosh, when you say, hey, I'm going to retire or trade me, you can't really bring a guy back after his, can you?
I smelled the top of my hand 2 days ago.
I ain't lying.
And I thought I stuck it in the toilet.
He needed out of there. It was kind of toxic for all parties.
I'm from Cincinnati. I totally understood where Carson Palmer was coming from. I'm going to go sit on my couch. I don't need to play for the Bengals. They're a frustrating organization. I totally understood where he's coming from.
Usually the NFL trade deadline kind of comes and goes, a couple moves here and there, but wow, what a blockbuster on this day.
Palmer held out the first 6 weeks of the 2011 season before the Bengals shipped him to Oakland for a first and a second.
Al Davis had just passed away.
Losing that man hurt me more than you know.
Hugh Jackson was basically running the entire team.
Jason Campbell goes down. He thinks they're a wild card team or possibly win the AFC West. So he swings for the fences, sends 2 draft picks for Carson Palmer.
Carson Palmer did not want to play in Cincinnati, and he gets his wish. He's going to play in Oakland.
I made better trades in my middle school lunchroom. Like, they gave up a lot for this guy.
Goose right slot, taco right. Yeah, or goose left slot, taco left.
And Hugh Jackson made a bold move and told everybody, I think it's the greatest trade in NFL history.
I say it was the greatest trade in football, but I wasn't saying it because of the trade. I was saying it because I wanted to give our team hope.
Short drop, pass left side, picked off, and Brandon Flowers.
Palmer won just 8 of his 24 starts in silver and black. Less than 2 years later, both he and Hugh Jackson were elsewhere.
People forget that he had an elbow injury for 2 or 3 years where he eschewed Tommy John surgery, probably should have had it. Was not the same thrower then that he is now.
Left, he got hit, nuts, he fumbled the ball.
That's a killer.
The problem with the trade wasn't Carson, it was the rest of the Raiders. I think Hugh Jackson, to some degree, was right. It was a really good trade, and Carson Palmer, as has been proven, had a ton of gas left in his tank.
Here they come. Palmer throwing deep, far side jump ball. Oh, it's caught.
And you look at what Carson Palmer has done since, maybe Hugh Jackson wasn't so crazy.
That's what we're really all about, man. That's what Raiders do. It's not the greatest trade, but I think it was a pretty good trade.
The number 7 in-season trade, Bobby Lane to Pittsburgh.
Poor Detroit fans. You know, you can always come up with where it all went wrong. And for Detroit fans, the trade of Bobby Lane is where it all started to go wrong.
The legend of this in-season trade for Bobby Lane has just always fascinated me.
I mean, there are people in Detroit that to this day still think that it's almost like a Curse of the Bambino thing.
Bobby Lane saying you will not win another playoff game for 50 years is the NFL's equivalent of Babe Ruth calling his shot. He put a pox on the Lions fans.
Lions fans that are under the age of 50 don't believe this ever happened.
Bobby Lane and the Lions won 3 championships in 8 years.
So for the second year in a row, the Professional Football World Championship goes to the Detroit Lions.
And then they trade him away, and there you go. It's the Bobby Lane curse.
Bobby Lane was so ticked off that the Lions had the audacity to trade him to the Pittsburgh Steelers. As legend has it, on the way out, he says, this franchise will never win a championship in 50 years.
In that 50 years, the Lions won 1 playoff game, lost 10. The last year of the curse, 2008, the Lions go 0-16.
He ran out of bounds. He ran out of the end zone. It's a safety. They are the worst team in league history.
Detroit received Earl Morrall and 2 draft choices, but not everyone cursed the trade of Bobby Lane.
I like this trade because at the time, Bobby Lane leads the Lions to their greatest era in franchise history. They were the team of the mid-1950s. Bobby Lane is the playboy quarterback. He's taking his linemen out drinking every night. He's on top of the NFL world. He goes to Pittsburgh.
At Pittsburgh's Forbes Field, former Lion favorite Bobby Lane led the Steelers.
And the impact there, that Pittsburgh says, no, we're good, we're straight. We got Bobby Lane. We're going to cut Johnny Unitas. We're going to cut Len Dawson. 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks because the Steelers are set at quarterback with Bobby Lane.
Bobby Lane had a type of leadership that was partly on the field, and it was partly in the locker room, and it was partly on the streets at 11 o'clock at night.
One time we passed him at halftime, coming out for the second half in Baltimore. I said, Bobby, how you doing? He breathed on me. I said, Jesus, is that from last night? He said, I had a couple at halftime.
Bobby Lane, yeah, he might have drank a lot and caroused and had late nights and bickered with coaches. But man, when you're winning 3 titles in 8 years, little do you know, you've got Matt Millen coming. Keep Bobby Lane as long as possible.
You go through history and you see these names like Greg Landry and Gary Danielson and Eric Hipple and Rodney Peete, and we can go on and on and on. This is an organization that has not recovered from a trade.
The number 6 in-season trade, Roy Williams to Dallas.
The Roy Williams trade is going to be on Jerry Jones's tombstone.
You heard it here first.
I loved him coming out of Texas. I thought he was going to be a great, great player. He was long, he was tall, he was athletic, he could run.
How about that?
I thought Roy Williams was going to be a superstar.
What a play by Roy Williams!
Roy Williams caught 28 touchdowns in his first 4 seasons in Detroit. But in 2008, on their way to an 0-16 season, the Lions shipped him off to Dallas.
Here's something to watch. Stay tuned.
Major deal at the trade deadline. The Cowboys acquiring Lions receiver Roy Williams and a 7th-round draft pick in exchange for Dallas's 1st, 3rd, and 6th-round picks.
It was like bringing home the hero of the state of Texas, and it just seemed like a match made in heaven.
Dallas likes stars. Jerry Jones likes stars, right?
Well, we're excited because it gets Roy Williams back to Texas, but it gets him on the other side of Terrell Owens.
This is the ultimate Jerry Jones in Dallas trade.
Now let me tell you, get up here, I want to talk to you.
You really are asking me what Jerry Jones was thinking?
Roy Williams said, I'm more happy to be a Dallas Cowboy than I am when I got my first bike.
It's going to be a costly deal for the Dallas Cowboys and the picks that they paid Detroit and the money they paid to Roy Williams, but the bottom line is Roy Williams will be tied to the Dallas Cowboys as they move into their new stadium for the next 5 years.
You can buy 10,000 bikes with the contract that Roy Williams got.
I wish we could trade for a day.
I don't even remember being that happy when I got my first bike.
It raises your eyebrows when a franchise gives up their best player, the best receiver. There's a problem there. I smell panic, and there's no need to panic at this time.
Kind of like what Deion did for the Cowboys and Charles Haley did for the Cowboys. They thought Roy Williams was going to do that for the Cowboys in his era and lead them to a Super Bowl and put them over the top.
It's not often that you leave Detroit and things get worse.
I ain't got nothing. Trading for Roy Williams, giving up all of that, and paying him that money was the biggest mistake Jerry Jones has ever made.
It's the playoffs, baby. May the best team win.
In 10 games following our number 6 trade, Roy Williams averaged under 20 yards receiving a game. In 2.5 years in Dallas, he topped 100 yards receiving just twice.
Please come back at a later time. I'll be with you in just a moment.
In the end, he got Wally pipped because Miles Austin comes in when he's hurt and has his career game against the Kansas City Chiefs.
Austin foot race. Austin will score.
And Roy Williams never gets his job back, and that's kind of the end of the Roy Williams era in Dallas, as short-lived as it was.
What's your favorite cartoon? Cartoon movie? No, just cartoon. Like Tom and Jerry, DuckTales. You don't remember DuckTales.
The number 5 in-season trade, John Hagel to the Packers.
John Hagel was an AFL quarterback who put up very good numbers for that era. With Sid Gilman, they aired it out. John Hagel is the guy you always see on Lance Allworth's highlight reels, throwing the deep ball. He wore 21, which was such a cool quarterback number.
All right, here we go.
He went to the Rams in the early 70s, and in 1973 had a very good season. The Rams won the NFC West. Hagel was a big reason why.
By the time we get to the mid-70s, he's no good anymore.
We just stunk this joint out so badly, it's unbelievable.
When Bart Starr was done playing in the early 70s, the Packers ran out a quarterback list that included names like Scott Hunter, Jerry Taggy, Jim Del Gazzo, and Jack Concannon. Head coach Dan Devine was desperate to acquire a legit quarterback.
This was Dan Devine at the end of his rope going, I'm going to get fired here. I'm going to get canned. I'm going to get the zig any moment. So what do? I don't have a quarterback. Can I get a quarterback? Where can I get a quarterback? Ah, yes, there's John Hagel. He was good 12 years ago. Who would ever give up like 1 million picks for a 34-year-old quarterback?
Normally, you don't pay for 35-year-old quarterbacks with 5 draft picks. It's a little bit overpriced, you know? If you go to the supermarket and, a can of soup costs $3.99, you're probably not paying $120 for it.
And for the man most responsible, for Dan Devine, it was undeniably a crowning moment.
Should Dan Devine have a statue next to Lombardi? That's a question that I have.
What was common in that era was to trade draft picks because there were coaches who believed that draft picks were almost worthless. The teams that did this routinely wound up at the bottom of the standings, and very often it was because they were bringing a 30-something quarterback to play a game that they were more suited for 10 years earlier.
Hagel comes in, as you might imagine, he's a disaster. He lasts a season and a half in Green Bay, and then he's gone. Dan Devine ends up in Notre Dame. So this guy runs the Packers franchise into the ground. They're terrible for the next 10 years, and he gets his golden parachute to Notre Dame.
The number 4 in-season trade, Marshawn Lynch to Seattle.
Marshawn Lynch in Buffalo is one of the most interesting.
He just didn't want to be in Buffalo. Clearly he had plenty of good football left.
Marshawn Lynch shaking and tackling to the 45 to midfield. He's going to the house. Marshawn Lynch at the 20, 15, 10, 5. Touchdown, Marshawn Lynch.
Why would you trade Marshawn Lynch?
That was a trade that had to happen because they had Marshawn Lynch already. They had Fred Jackson, who was coming off a 1,000-yard season.
Unbelievable run for Fred Jackson.
And then they drafted C.J. Spiller.
Touchdown, touchdown, C.J. Spiller, the thriller.
He was 24 years old, had been to a Pro Bowl, had a 1,000-yard season already, and you knew he was going to be great somewhere.
Lynch cuts it up the middle, and he walks into the end zone. Touchdown, Buffalo. Marshawn marches on.
Buffalo received a 4th and 5th round pick from Seattle, and Lynch packed his bags for the Emerald City.
For whatever reason, there are times when a player and a city and a team just have this perfect intersection.
You are spectacular. Goodness gracious, beast mode.
Marshawn Lynch became the heartbeat of Seattle.
Don't you guys know you can't tackle beast mode like that?
When you went into that locker room and you talked to every single player on any of those teams, they would say the same thing. Marshawn Lynch drives this bus. He is the beating heart of the team. He is the one who gave us the toughness we have, and we only go as far as he takes us.
I think we can take this to the Super Bowl.
It's one of the great trades in NFL history because the Seattle Seahawks built a championship team basically around Marshawn Lynch and his identity on offense.
They gave up a 4th and a 5th for a guy who was basically the centerpiece of their team for a number of years.
Marshawn gets it. He's 320. Are you kidding me?
It's a rare thing for one player to change the culture of a franchise that much and that specifically, especially a non-quarterback. That doesn't happen a lot.
I'm going to be in the hood giving out turkeys like Nino Brown, baby. Like Nino Brown, trying to restore my community.
Going to Seattle was the best thing Marshawn Lynch ever did because this is where his wonderful character that we know blossomed.
But it looks so good. But it looks so good. It must have came from the stars up above.
And then he has that historic great run.
Left side. Finds a little bit of a hole. Keeps his legs moving. He's across the 40. Midfield. 45. He's on the run. Lynch. 40. Pushes the man. 35. Look at him go. He's down to 20. 15. He could go. He is going to go. Touchdown Seahawks. Oh, my word.
Probably the most memorable playoff touchdown run in history, the Beastquake. If that had been the only thing that he did for the Seahawks, it would have already been a lopsided trade.
That was an incredible trade by the Seahawks. The Bills, not so much.
It's a steal. I mean, it's hitting a grand slam 3 consecutive at-bats.
It was one of those deals where you look at it, and when it happens, you just kind of shrug your shoulders a little bit and think, okay, maybe.
The number 3 in-season trade, Mike Haynes to the Raiders.
The Raiders had to be having a party after that trade was consummated.
Just win, baby.
Oh, by the way, you're gonna have Mike Haynes here and Lester Hayes over there. We'll just have 2 lockdown corners. That was an iconic trade for them in their history.
In 1983, Pro Bowl cornerback Mike Haynes was holding out. The Raiders pounced, but almost too late.
So the Haynes trade was not submitted before the deadline. So it ended up in court. Huge surprise. Raiders, NFL, in court. Who would guess?
You gotta love the Raiders in the 80s. A lot of their big stories involve court.
I'm from Los Angeles, and so for me it was an opportunity to go home and play in front of my family and friends, the city I grew up in.
The Raiders won their day in court and added a future Hall of Famer.
If you're looking for an ideal corner to play, other than me, of course, my size, would be Mike Haynes. Mike could have made All-Pro as a wide receiver, but just that good. He'd lull you to sleep and think you're getting away, but next thing you know, you turn and Mike is all over you.
He was still in his prime, and he would have several more Pro Bowl seasons after this.
First day I saw him in El Segundo, he walked in. I said, you know, Mike, we can get this done, but you being here playing for the Raiders, we will go to the Super Bowl.
The 80s Raiders were prophets. Haynes' future cornerback partner predicted the trade 8 months before it happened.
Lester's first Pro Bowl, I guess it might be where we first met, and he said to me, "You're going to be a Raider. I have talked to the stars, or it is foretold that you will wear the silver and black." And sure enough, later that year, I'm a Raider. And I said, "Lester, do you remember?" He goes, "Hey, you can't beat destiny. It is destined that you're going to be here."
He was able to step right in and play at a high level immediately.
The price was a first and a second round pick. The result was arguably the best cornerback tandem in NFL history.
When the Raiders got Mike Haynes, they said, "Oh my God, we got it all now. Put him on the other side of Lester. You could forget about anybody throwing on you."
Stout back, sets up, delivers one to Sweeney, interception Hayes, 18-yard line, 15, 10, 5, touchdown Raiders!
When Haynes hooked up with Lester Hayes, it formed, a great tandem
for cornerbacks, and not many teams like going against the Raiders back in that era.
Well, you put those guys on the edges. Guys couldn't get off the line of scrimmage. That was a fun theater out there watching those guys play.
You guys were magnificent, dominated. We deserve to be the champs.
Their destiny was complete in January. 3 months after the trade, the Raiders were champions.
Think of the '83 Redskins as like the '98 Vikings, or the 2007 Patriots with Brady, Welker, and Moss, and the Raiders completely shut them down, and it was because they're corners. That trade cannot be underestimated. I don't know that the Raiders win that Super Bowl without Mike Haynes.
The number 2 in-season trade, Eric Dickerson to Indianapolis.
I don't think when you guys are ranking the Dickerson trade, you're not looking at what happens afterwards. You're talking about the shock value of the moment when it's easy to forget now, but his first 5 years with the Rams, people were acting like he was going to challenge Jim Brown as the best running back of all time. He sets the single-season rushing mark. Everybody thinks that Dickerson's going to be the greatest in history, and to see him get traded, he becomes available. I think that's what shocked everyone.
Eric Dickerson was a different kind of back than the NFL had seen. The entire team, not just the offense, revolved around Eric Dickerson every single week.
Pitch back to Dickerson, turns left, steps inside, out to the 30, 35 to the 40, to the 45, to the 50, down to the 35, down to the 25, down to the 10, 5, touchdown, Eric Dickerson.
Eric Dickerson was all about the money.
I've asked the Rams to pay me the same salary that other successful running backs are now being paid. As soon as the Rams Vice President John Shaw has agreed to extend my contract for 3 years, I will join the Rams in training camp.
He was a phenomenal player, and he was a dedicated player, but he was all about the money.
I mean, I'm still happy to be playing with the Rams, but I don't want to be a fool either. I have to look out for everyone.
Dickerson was on his way to the Hall of Fame. Dickerson just wanted to be paid more money. And the Rams are just sick of hearing all of his gripes. And so the Colts, needing to have a splash in Indianapolis, this is what Ron Meyer and that franchise felt they needed to make the splash to get the attention.
Eric Dickerson told me that they tried to ship him to Siberia if they could. Well, they couldn't, so they found Indianapolis, which in NFL terms at the time was Siberia.
Consisting of 3 teams and 10 players, it's still one of the biggest trades in NFL history.
But he just put it down into another gear. That's fun to watch.
One of the greatest trades, blockbuster trades in NFL history. There were 10 components: Eric Dickerson, Cornelius Bennett, and a bunch of other players.
The Indianapolis Colts needed to put themselves on the map.
For you, that you're worth with 3 number 1s, 3 number 2s, and 2 other running backs?
Well, I don't know. That's a lot, isn't it? We just have to wait and see.
They had to give fans in a basketball city and a basketball state some reason to believe that this football team was anything other than a fly-by-night operation run on a shoestring. Enter Eric Dickerson.
The Colts became relevant, and Dickerson became the face of the franchise.
And at first, it kind of looks brilliant for the Colts.
Strong start for that man, number 29, Eric Dickerson. And things have certainly turned for the Colt franchise. We run the ball! Do we run the ball? Do we run the ball, Ron?
Eric Dickerson gave them national credibility immediately.
That trade is massive for this city because it put us on the NFL map.
Great job, buddy. Great job. Hey, have some fun around here.
Eric Dickerson did what he was traded to do in Indianapolis. He ran for 1,000 yards the year they got him. He ran for over 1,600 yards the next year.
And people need to remember the Monday night game, Halloween 1988.
Cannon will give to Dickerson off the left side, cuts up the middle, 35, 30, 25, 20, 50, 10, 5, touchdown! 4 of them tonight, 4! The first time in his career he scored 4 touchdowns in a game.
Eric Dickerson rushes for, I think it was 157, 159 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he played 1 series in the 3rd quarter.
There aren't many players that were great players in 2 different cities, that were Hall of Fame caliber players in 2 different cities.
The number 1 in-season trade, Herschel Walker to the Vikings.
It is mind-boggling that we were able to make this deal. One owner said it's The great train robbery.
Yeah, I don't even think there's a debate here. That has to be the greatest trade.
The Herschel Walker trade's got to be number one.
It's a dynasty maker.
Yeah! Back to back, baby! Back to back, baby! Back, baby! Cowboys back to back in the house! Yeah!
Easy choice for number one. I don't think there's another contender.
I remember at the time, I think a lot of people thought the Cowboys were crazy for doing this.
Herschel could be on his way to the Super Bowl, while the Cowboys could be on their way to the toilet bowl.
It has to be the number one because still to this day, nearly 30 years later, people still always say the Herschel Walker trade. Well, remember the Herschel Walker trade. You don't want that to be the Herschel Walker trade.
The Herschel Walker trade is a cautionary tale. It is a lesson to be learned. It's a campfire story among general managers in all sports.
The Dallas Cowboys showed everybody after that the value of draft picks. Now everybody hoards their draft picks because nobody wants to have the reverse Herschel Walker trade.
How about them Cowboys?
He was terrible in Minnesota. He was an awful player in Minnesota. He was an awful fit. His talents did not translate in any way, shape, or form to what the Vikings were doing.
It's not only awful from the Viking standpoint because they traded away all these pieces that helped them get to an NFC Championship game just 2 years before. It's not only that. It's that Herschel Walker in his first 2 plays as a Viking looked like he was the godsend that they had traded for.
A 52-yard kickoff return, the first time he touches it in a Minnesota uniform.
It's called back, but everyone's going, oh my goodness. And then his next play touches the ball.
Here comes Herschel on 2nd and 5. Across the 30, 35, 40. At midfield, Herschel breaks away, loses his shoe.
And then from then on, he was nothing. Poof. He had 2 good plays.
This is an outstanding trade regarding the future of the Cowboys.
Everyone loves Herschel Walker, one of the great athletes of our life. But to get what amounted to, 11 or 12 bodies, and some of them #1 picks.
In exchange for Walker, Dallas will receive a #1 draft pick, plus 6 conditional draft choices over the next 3 years, including 2 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, and 1 third-round pick.
Just amazing, amazing talent for that 92, 93, 95 world champion Dallas Cowboys.
The guys he got back, he was able to flip them for conditional picks. And it was Emmitt Smith. It was Darren Woodson.
Dallas selects Emmitt Smith, running back for Florida.
Yeah, the problem isn't only that the Vikings are bad because of it. It's that it builds a dynasty on the other side of the ledger. And there's never been a trade this clear and this clean in terms of building up one franchise and sinking the other.
Jimmy Johnson's taking his team from the absolute worst to the absolute best in 4 years.
This trade equals 3 Super Bowls for the Cowboys. You can't ever say that in NFL history outside of this.
Are you having a good time now, Jerry? I want to tell you, we did it our way, baby! We did it! We did it! We did it!
That trade changed NFL history, no doubt, because the Dallas Cowboys are one of the great dynasties of all time, and it just doesn't happen without that trade, without all the draft picks they got.